is a visual makeover to grow Cognos usage and appeal. I'm going to start with a little bit about myself. All right, I can hopefully we're seeing this change. So I'm a nuts and bolts BI guy. So I started my analytics career with Cognos. I love Cognos. I absolutely love Cognos. It is my thing. I love working in and around Cognos, but I also like other tools. I'm very fortunate to love my job and the company I work for. I work for Ironside. I've been there for a long time. So I've been with Ironside for about 14 years. This is where I started my career in analytics. I was a Cognos consultant, so I did a lot of development, hands-on keyboard. Then I ended up managing some teams at Ironside, and then now my title is Director of Client Service. Effectively, though, I am the BI Practice Director. I'm going to list some of my New Year's resolutions just to keep it interesting, right? And you'll see why in a second. So this top one has been my New Year's resolutions for a few years going. It's be more honest, be less boring, which is why I listed these, and then have a sunnier disposition. That one comes from my wife. So I'm going to try and do these three things and incorporate them in this presentation, and I hope that it works. So we're going to see some pictures, and hopefully I'm just not going to be boring, right? The last one, the sunnier disposition, I'm going to struggle with that one. I'm just going to let you know right now. So the agenda for today is we're going to talk about creating useless content, right? And then we're going to talk about something called experience design, user experience. Why does it matter? Ironside's four-step process to doing this. A little bit about storytelling and building trust with BI and reporting. We're going to look at some examples, and then we're going to get into who does this kind of work, right? Do we have the people on staff to do it? Right. All right, so we're going to take a look at this kind of time-tested approach, right? So we've established that we're probably around, intuition says half of the stuff that we have in Cognos is not used today, right? And so why? So this is going to be somewhat philosophical a little bit. So when we started realizing this years and years ago, we're like, well, why does this happen? And we looked at the approach that we took to doing development, right? And we said, okay, well, I gather requirements, right? We hear that all the time. And then we do development, do some testing, and we deploy, right? Really simple three-step process, time tested, right? I need a report that lists open accounts in Southeast Ohio. So as a Cognos developer, I'm throwing a list on there, dragging and filtering. I'm going to create that list. I'm going to send it over to them. And they say, hey, this is exactly what I asked for. Great. I'm done. Right. And then we find out after 2 weeks that they're not using it. Right. So this time tested approach isn't really that great anymore. Right. I hear it all the time. How do you start? I go gather the requirements. Right. And when I hear that nowadays, I'm like, oh, this is just not going to end very well. So why this topic, and why are we talking about it, right? So reports have evolved over the years. If you have been in the BI space for longer than I have, you remember kind of these green banner reports. I still see those, right? I have a customer that every morning somebody prints out these reports and they push these reports and deliver them via a cart every morning. This lady pushes this cart around and just hands these reports to people. So these still do exist. We've got Excel, we've got Cognos, and now we've got a lot of stuff on mobile, right? So the evolution of reporting, right, is just a reason why we should talk about it. You know, if you've got Cognos reports that are 10 years old, guess what? They look older today than they did back then. And if you have the business and you have users who have access to other tools, simply by the fact that they're creating new content, it's just going to look newer than old reports in Cognos. So it makes sense for us to take a look at what we can do to kind of spice up old reporting, as well as create new reporting in a different way. I'm going to talk a little bit about how people consume. So we've got like the Brady Bunch music, MTV and Instagram. You know, when the Brady Bunch was airing, 30 minutes was kind of the lowest denominator of time. You know, we wouldn't really watch anything or do anything in less than 30 minutes. Then came MTV, we had music videos, and it's now 4 to 7 minutes, and that's what keeps our attention. Now in Instagram, we're talking 5 to 20 seconds maybe, right? So people need their attention grabbed right away. And in today's world, the average human being has an 8.25 second attention span. Supposedly, that is shorter than a goldfish. right? So if you think about what we used to do back when we were creating reports on green paper versus what we're doing today, we need to make sure we grab their attention right away. I look at down the bottom, I have this thing called unboxing videos. I don't know if anybody has seen these, but they are literally videos of people opening products, not reviewing the product itself, but just opening the box, which is amazing to me and terrifying to me because my children are watching unboxing videos of toys, not for the toy, but to watch people open the box, right? So if you have an iPhone and you bought one, um, you can see how much design and effort went into opening the box. And it's because there's an experience behind this. And there's an experience behind a new tool, and there's an experience behind opening up Cognos and seeing what happens for the first 5 seconds, right? So we seek to improve this experience because we believe that when we do so, it'll increase the usage and adoption. So next slide. So how do we do this? We now take a different approach to designing and building, right? So we're going to first strive to understand the goals, user needs. We're going to actually design, not develop, and then we're going to develop. So given that same scenario, we want to evaluate the effectiveness of our Southeast Ohio office. It's very different than what we had, which was give me a list of things in Ohio, right? I need to understand how many new accounts were opened per year since it is our key measure of performance. So we are asking deeper questions than what we did before. I know many of you look at this and probably say, oh yeah, this is obvious. I do this. My developers, they do this. When they have discussions with a business, yeah, absolutely we need to understand their goals and absolutely we need to understand their needs. So I get that most of you look at this and say, we do it. I'm going to show you how we do it. And then you can kind of self-reflect and say, am I doing it the way that Ironside does? Am I doing it a little bit differently? And what are the differences in the way that we approach this? Oh, sorry, going backwards. Okay, so we're going to talk about experience design and we're talking about user experience. I'm going to leave it in a blank slide for now. And what is experience design? So if you guys remember, I don't know if this restaurant's still around, but the Rainforest Cafe, right? When you walked into there, if you've ever been in one, it's like this, supposedly like a prehistoric type of restaurant. They have like a little, water feature where there's an alligator. You hear sounds like they play, chirping birds and frogs. I mean, you walk in, they have a misting machine. You get blasted with a mist of water. So that's an experience, right? And when you go into Disney World and you go into a ride and your chairs are rumbling and they have heat blowing at you, all that is an experience, and the smell is an experience. When you walk into an Apple store, the fact that everything is white, right? There's even a certain smell when it comes to certain stores. If you go to an Abercrombie and Fitch and you got two models sitting outside half naked, like that is an experience, and that is a designed experience. It was purposeful. In the BI and analytics world, it's slightly different, right? It's a user experience that we're talking about. So this is kind of not the sound and the smells and that kind of stuff. It's the two-dimensional experience that somebody has when they go and use a report or they use an interface. So we're going to talk about the user experience, and that's more, again, two-dimensional. So design is not just about making things look pretty, right? It's look, it's feel, it's usability, right? That look, it generates credibility and trust. That's really important. And what we often forget about is the feel, the interaction, and what are people feeling when they're actually using this. And as a developer of Cognos, I can tell you I did none of these things except for maybe a little interaction and a little bit of functionality. But most of the time, when I used to build reports, it was, I'm going to get some requirements. They give me a list, and I go get that list, and I go build it. I give it to them, and they say, yeah, it's all on there. And then I build it. The best user experience is when we kind of meet in that middle, right? So 3 reasons why this matters. And the first reason is that as a report developer, and I've done this for years, I'm not the user, right? I've never been a CFO. I've never, managed the production floor of a manufacturing facility. So it's hard for me to build something without the experience and without being in their shoes. So this is just a funny picture. Obviously this person has never swung on a swing, but they built one, right? And clearly it's not going to work, but did they meet the requirements? Yeah, they probably did. Nobody would ever think to say, don't put a wall behind a swing. And For the second reason is to share this common vision and really just consensus gather, right? When everybody is clear on what they're trying to build and the reasons why they're going to build it and what they intend to accomplish when it's done, you get a much better result. This kind of second paragraph, good design doesn't happen by default, and it really does not, right? If you think about iPhone and Apple apps that you have, how many of you, I don't know, I go through weather apps all the time. I download one and it's the same weather. They make the same predictions, but if it doesn't look good and it's not intuitive and I don't get what I want immediately, I go find the next app, right? And I do that within 10 to 15 seconds of using it, right? So when these people, when they design, they involve designers. But when we build Cognos reports, I don't know how many of you involve designers. We just go build it, right? And we forego the design component because it's just not what we're used to, right? So upfront design reduces costs, and I can give you an example, right? The idea here is if we design correctly, then we don't produce all this unused content, which it'll just get rebuilt again once they've forgotten about it and they say, well, we need that report again. Go give it another try. It is more expensive when you do this upfront, but the results are way, way better. And I'll show you some examples. One particular dashboard that we were involved in, we were called in to work on something that a company had worked on for 8 months, a dashboard for 8 months. And they said, we need this dashboard. It's critical. And so they went through that time-tested approach. They gathered requirements, they built it, tested, deployed it, and it was horrible. And the business said, we still really need this, but it's not hitting the mark. And so they did it again. And so they actually went through 6 iterations of this over 8 months and still didn't arrive at something. They had something that was accurate, but it didn't hit the mark. And they called us in there and we went through our process, right? And it took a while. This one in particular took about a month and a half because there's so many people involved of just that design process. But at the end, like this is something they use today and they love it. And it's the same information as the previous company had used. We just represented it in a completely different way. So this process, we call it the double diamond model. This is very simplistic, and I'll go into details in a little bit, right? But on the left-hand side, finding the problem in kind of this kind of turquoise color. We do a discovery, we do an analysis. That is intuitive, right? We get to the point where we have a clearly defined design goal. And then what we try to do is we attempt to design it and we test it and we iterate through this. We go back and forth with the users. So what does that look like? This discovery phase, that left side triangle, right? We are immersing ourselves in context, right? So what we are doing is figure out who's there using it, what are they doing, what tools are they using, what does the environment look like, right? These are the actual types of things that we're doing during discovery. So we're doing research. We literally research production floor management, right? We're looking at quantitative things. We're looking at qualitative things. We are going and standing behind somebody to look at how they're doing their job on the production floor. The experiential is we're going to become a customer. If we're doing research and we're doing a dashboard about customer acquisition, we'll go through the process of becoming a customer and sign up and see what it's like, right? So we go through these things as part of our discovery process. So if you remember from back when we had that 4-step process and I said, you may think that you're doing it, but this is the way that we do it. I'm not saying that we're right, but we do it this way, right? And we take a much more in-depth approach to this kind of discovery, this discovery method. And I'll show you some pictures and that'll illustrate a lot, right? We read about it, conversational, observational, become a customer, and let the customer join in. So this analysis phase, right, is when I'm going to read this. It's a process where we strive to frame a picture of the data that accurately captures the essence of reality. So what we're doing here is we're doing heuristic reviews, journey mapping, user flows, we're developing personas, and we're also doing some data gap analysis. The exploratory design phase, right? This is where we are starting to brainstorm about what the solution might look like. And we're going to probably do a lot of different types of sketching. And we're going to show this to our end users and start to ask them, does this work? Does this not work? It makes a lot more sense when we get to this slide, right? So we're going to start with a block frame. So I don't know if you guys have started to use these types of things, but this is definitely not how I developed Cognos reports way back in 2008. We start with a block frame. We don't put any data on there, right? Data really confuses people because when they see it, they're like, well, that number is not correct. That number doesn't make sense. And we don't want that as part of this initial design phase. We just want them to see visually, where are things going to sit on a page? How is it going to look? Is it the right place? Is it too small? Is it too big? Like if something's super important, why does it have the bottom right-hand corner, right? As we iterate through the block frame, we get to a low fidelity wireframe. We start to see more content. We're seeing some representative numbers, and we may purposely put the wrong numbers on here just so that people know, don't pay attention to the numbers. What we're looking for is interactions. And then when we get to high fidelity wireframes where we have color, we have more of these real numbers on here. And I will tell you that when you can get a group of people to a high fidelity wireframe and they agree that this is it, they have seen this, they have been a part of the building of this, they have given their feedback. If you get to this point of high fidelity wireframe, again, we have not touched Cognos yet. The likeliness that you create something that is not used later is so slim. And the people are so excited to use this because they have seen a representation of the final result that they can't wait for you to build it, right? I don't know it's been very seldom where I've been called in to do development where I've had this experience where people want that report and they can't wait for me to finish it. But when we go about this process, you truly get to the point where your consumers want it and they are asking for it and they can't wait to see the next iteration. And we're talking about the kind of testing and refining phase. That's what it is. It's going through multiple iterations of likely the low fidelity and high fidelity wireframing. One important thing to note here, the challenge is how to choose between designs. That's up to the users and the designer. How do you know it's good? How do you know when we're done? Right? How to know when we're done piece is important. We know we're done when we don't have anything left to change or we run out of money, right? Because we could potentially do these forever. So I suggest when we do these that we choose a number of iterations that we're going to go through, or we time box it because they'll go forever, right? So that's an important thing to note. Here's some pictures of what we do. And again, when we brought that 4-step process up, and there's probably a lot of you saying like, we do it already, and maybe you do. These are some of the things, some of the way we facilitate our discovery. Right now, we're doing Post-it notes, and we're taking these with stakeholders and users. We're putting them on a wall. We're going and grouping them into different groups. We're going up and down in priority so that our designer knows what is the most important and how to group them. That's one thing that we do. We also do some experience mapping, right? So I don't know if you can imagine you're a Cognos developer going to a group of people and conducting these types of meetings because we can't, right? And then we also do some concept showcase, right? So imagine if your Cognos developer goes and says, well, this is what I'm envisioning for a bar chart. And people are, well, just give me a bar chart. But when you start to get into the details, you will realize there's a lot of different bar charts, and they will show different things in different ways and tell different stories. So we want to be very specific. And we'll talk about telling stories and building trust. Right, so I'm going to show you a chart. It's a simple chart, nothing wrong with it, right? I've got ticket volume received, I've got ticket volume processed, right? And so this is a grouped vertical bar chart, right? And I've got, I'm assuming the ticket numbers on the left-hand side, and it's got decimal points. So when I look at this, I'm trying to figure out what is this telling me, right? And I look and I can compare January, they're about equal. February, they're about equal. March, they're slightly different. April, just almost equal. May, almost equal. And then in June, we're starting to look at like some variations. And then once we get to August, it's pretty heavy. September, October, November, December, it's getting pretty heavy. So in my mind, if I'm looking at this, I'm like, oh, is this may be some seasonality in there? I don't know what it's telling me. But if you can imagine somebody who's entwined with the business or really understand the data is like, guys, this is screaming a problem. Like Clearly the problem is there, but myself and perhaps many of you out there, like, what's the problem? I don't get it. I see there's some variations, but what am I going to do, right? So this is an example of a chart that, if you're a Cognos developer, really easy for us to whip up and say we hit the mark, right? They asked for this, we did it. They asked for, I want to show the difference between volume received and volume processed month over month. And I'll show you what it looks like when a designer has gotten hold of it, understood what the goal that we're trying to achieve, and then in a very meticulous fashion, try to tell the story. So, in big bold letters, please approve the hire of 2 FTEs to backfill those who quit in the past year. So we'll look at this chart and we'll realize that the information is the exact same information. And instead of going to a vertical grouped bar chart, we are now going to lines. We got rid of the decimal points on the left-hand side because it didn't make any difference. Our date is still, our x-axis dates, that's still the same. But now we can visually see in a much clearer fashion the difference between received and processed. So we see this kind of in August, there's a pretty big difference. And there's now a line that signifies that an event has occurred, right? 2 employees quit in May. So there's an issue with keeping up with demand, right? When you compare that last chart with this one, like this one's clearly better. It clearly tells the story, whereas the last one was just a chart. And if you didn't have that story, you wouldn't know what to do, right? So imagine creating this versus creating the other one, and imagine who would use the other one, or if they had some access to something like this. Here's this awesome website called lingscars.com. This is just amazing too, right? If you look on the upper left-hand corner, it says, "I am Ling, you can trust me," right? And this is a real website, and I urge you to go over to lingscars.com. It is real. I hope it's real. And if you look at the top, so like, I live inside my car leasing website all day, Monday to Friday. I lease the cheapest PCP and contract hire cars in the UK. I am Ling, accept no substitutes, right? Now, this is not BI, but this, I'm going to ask some rhetorical questions like, was this designed by a designer, or was this designed by Ling, right? And it is amazing in itself because it's just this travesty of everything. And it's the only reason why it's so interesting to look at is not because it may be successful because it's so horrible, but it's not successful for good reasons, right? Would I trust Ling if I'm going to go and buy a $100,000 car? Would I trust Ling to go and do it for me, right? Because he's naming these cars like Snappy Dresser, Mega Hatch, Groovy Car. Like he's just way off all over the place, just off, right? And then you look at other car websites. Who do you trust? Right? Can you even though Ling says, "I am Ling, you can trust me," will you trust him? Right? So I have another picture of who would you trust with your debit card? You're going to go get gas, right? And you go to this pump. It's a clean pump. It looks fine. You're first, you go to this gas station and you have an alternative across the street, and you see this. Or like, is there one that you're gonna go to, right? Do I trust that when I leave, nobody's going to have taken my credit card information? It's the same gas, analogous to BI, where it's the same data, but the look and feel makes such a big difference to people. And we have never recognized that really in the BI world, right? Especially when we first started with Cognos back when it was Impromptu and then C8, wasn't really on our mind to go make something look clean, and have the experience be a good experience when they used it, right? We're going to actually look at some Cognos dashboards. So here's one, and if you're in a Cognos all the time, you recognize this color scheme. This is a Cognos report. We've got an as of date. We've got some crosstabs on here. You can intuitively behind the scenes if there's a table, and then below that, there's some, you've got some radio button, multi-radio button prompting, and then you've got a drop down for relative time, right? And if you see, you've got top customers, top products, top sales reps, so intuitively behind the scenes, you've got multiple queries behind the scenes, so that this took some work. Was it 2 months? No, but it took some work. And building relative time, which we can't see how much relative time there is. That took some work as well. So this is actually a pretty involved development process that went into this, right? And I'm pretty sure that many of you have reports that look like this. And I can tell you that I have built many of these types of reports over the years, may have even been hundreds of them. And I can tell you that I intuitively don't think that many of these are still in use today. And it's just sad, right? So what we can do with something like this, if you had somebody who could go through a design process, a UX person that could go through a design process, can make it look much better, right? So here's that same information represented in a different way, and it doesn't even look like it's in Cognos, right? So Cognos, for people who've been in and around Cognos for like 10 years, they expect it to look a certain way. And sometimes, based on its comparison with other tools, they expect it to look old. And it doesn't have to, right? So this is a Cognos report. It has that same information. It's clean. It's intuitive. We have microcharts that represent data way better than just the number. And just overall, this is just so much more of a pleasant experience to go through than this report, right? And it has the same information on there. So I have a few other examples of other stuff that doesn't look like Cognos at all. And if you're not building stuff like this, you should reconsider what you're building, because maybe these people aren't going to use the stuff that you build. Because our experience is when you just have a developer go and gather requirements and go build, it ends up being that 50% that doesn't get used, right? So who is kind of this UX person, this user experience person? The funniest thing about this is that what we've been finding over the course of the past few years, as we've been doing this and driving more adoption to Cognos, is the person who's doing it, this UX person, actually doesn't know anything about Cognos, and they may not know anything about BI. And that is the person. That is our kind of the funniest part about it is they drive the most adoption, and they have no idea about this tool or about this space, or they don't necessarily have to, right? So we bring in somebody that's non-traditional BI to improve BI. And so what does this look like, right? And I use this kind of animated graphic just because, I don't know, it's interesting. I'm trying to be more interesting, right? Less boring. Is they think a different way. So designer is creative, right? And they have a different way of thinking about things. So they have more of an artistic background and a design background. They have, and this is really important, processes for discovery. So if you go back to that one of the first few slides where there's a 4-step process now, right, where we're looking at goals, not just gathering requirements. How do they go and gather requirements? That traditional gathering requirements phase, right? These people hold workshops. They're interactive. They get sticky notes. They draw on the wall. They draw on the whiteboard. They role play. So that is the way that these people gather requirements in the traditional sense. So when I was building Cognos reports, we did none of that. I sat in a room like, all right, guys, what data do you need? Let me write it down, give it to me in Excel, tell me where it exists, right? And I'm going to go and build it. Very different type of scenario. When they do interview people, these are not like the interviews that at least I am familiar with back in my days of development. These are more like therapy sessions, right? They're like, tell me what keeps you up at night. What's important? What does your boss want you to deliver, and how do they want you to deliver it? When you come in the morning, what is the first thing that you do? So their interviews are more like therapy sessions. So finding somebody with an artistic background and a design, kind of has design thinking, and their process for discovery is more like this than it is give me the Excel sheet with everything I need. That is the type of person that you look for. They also are people that are capable of going from this conceptual requirements and drawings to wireframes, mockups, low fidelity, high fidelity, and they often do it without the data. right? Because they they are not data experts, which is a great thing when you're doing design. They want to take the data out of the equation versus if you have developers and business analysts going at this, the data is very much central to the design. So they go through wireframes and mockups before any data is introduced. And what they often don't have, and they might, it'd be great if you found people with this, but they may not have any experience in a BI tool, and they may not have any experience in software development or programming. And I would argue that sometimes it is even better for them not to have this experience. And the reason is because when you have a foregone conclusion that Cognos must look like this and it must act like this, you design to Cognos. And then you end up with something that looks like Cognos. But what people are looking for nowadays is that they don't care what tool it is, as long as it's beautiful and it's interactive and it's great to use, that's what they want. So our UX designers often they develop experience in kind of BI tools. So we have done this on a bunch of different BI tools, but they don't need to, and oftentimes it is better. So some of the benefits of the UX role, if it isn't clear so far, is the user engagement and the buy-in, right? When we take them through this process of going and sitting and going through therapy sessions with a UX designer, and making sure that 5 or 7 people are on the same page with what goals they have for a particular dashboard, that buy-in is just so much better than it is sitting and saying, what are your requirements? The relationship between if it is IT building these and the user is much, much stronger because they feel like they have a stronger voice in how things are made. The division of labor is better because now the developer or the business analyst isn't stuck trying to design stuff, right? For me, and most of you probably don't know me very well, I'm horrible at design. I can build anything, right? But as far as design, like I make the ugliest things that exactly hit what the users want. So this division of labor, when you bring in that person to do that part of it, is so much better because now I have a target, and they say it's got to look this way, it's got to interact this way, and now I have something to build towards. And the development time is much shorter, right? Instead of me trying to mess around and build stuff and I'm being unclear on what my target is, I know my target. Now, usually what happens with UX people is they give you much harder targets, which is a challenge, but it's better. The result is better and you do it in a short amount of time. And all of it is just like the requirements are just so much clearer when you have that high fidelity wireframe and you know exactly like pixel by pixel, the left menu is going to be this, the right menu is going to be this, the space is going to be 30%. Like you know exactly what it's going to be like. You know the colors, you know everything. It's just way easier to do development. And with the overall goal of making sure that this stuff is actually used and people love it. And we've been seeing a ton of that over the past few years as we've been doing development this way.